Breaking news concerning the U.S. economy.
And it's gone.
What?
It's gone. It's all gone.
Not socialism.
All right, let's not panic.
And it's gone.
I'll make the money back by selling one of my livers. I can get by with one.
Government should be a partner. Partner.
I don't need anybody's money. It's nice. I'm really rich.
And it's gone. Gone.
Hey, welcome to episode 8 of the Global Crypto Podcast. I'm James, and just before we get started, I want to ask you a big favor. Won't you support Global Crypto's work by simply subscribing, liking, perhaps sharing this video or the podcast on your Twitter or Facebook, LinkedIn channels? We appreciate all that support. It means the world to us and helps us get the message out there. This episode, of course, proudly sponsored by Luno. It's with Stacy Herbert. She's of the Keiser Report. She's married to Max Keiser. You know who she is. Luno are our sponsors. We appreciate their support for making this podcast and this show happen. So let's hear from them quickly.
For fast local bank deposits and withdrawals, advanced charting tools, and API access for automated trading, sign up with Luno, Africa's most trusted, secure, and reliable crypto exchange. Go to www.luno.com or download the Luno app. Ranked in the global top 10 exchanges by Crypto Compare. T's and C's apply. Cryptocurrencies are volatile and unpredictable. Never risk more than you're willing to lose.
A New Yorker who chased the Hollywood dream, studying literature at UCLA, and began her literary career working under none other than Oscar-winning producer Michael Phillips, of course, producer of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. She then married a fellow New Yorker and famed and sometimes called crazed banker Max Keiser. Ladies and gents, please welcome to Global Crypto, Stacy Herbert. Stacy, welcome.
Good to be here, James. Thank you for calling me a New Yorker. I was indeed born in New York, but Max refuses to call me a New Yorker because I grew up in Connecticut. So he refuses to give that to me.
Well, let's start right there then. What is it like to be married to such an opinionated man like Max?
Well, you know what? We call Stacy Max's operating system. He is a guy out there with big ideas and interesting takes on things, and he's like that all the time.
Now, let's go back to before you even met. I want to start with your career in film. What were your aspirations as a college student, even a teenager, and how do you feel about what you've achieved now?
Well, I was at UCLA studying literature, and it was a liberal arts college, so you had all these things like you had to take some mathematics courses, you had to take science. I took economics because that filled one of the mathematics requirements. So I learned some economics, but I also took a class that was actually a graduate level, and it was called The Power of Hollywood. The something about the power of Hollywood, the power of filmmaking, the power of the movie industry. And it was taught by a guy named Peter Guber, who was the head of Columbia Pictures at the time.
Wow.
And somehow I got in. I didn't really, my interest wasn't Hollywood. I was reading Chaucer and Shakespeare and things like that. And I thought maybe I was going to go to law school. But I got accepted into this class. Only 3 students from undergrads got accepted, including myself and then 2 other women, including Peter Guber's daughter and also Norman Brokaw's daughter. He was the head of William Morris. So I was like the only ordinary person accepted into this class. And by the way, the class was had special guest lecturers like Francis Ford Coppola and, the head of Sony Pictures worldwide, actually Sony worldwide. And so when I learned that I was accepted, and then Peter Guber told me, oh, you have to take an internship for this if you're an undergrad. And I was like work for free? I was like, I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. And he said, well, I know this guy, Michael Phillips, and he made Taxi Driver. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. Taxi Driver is my favorite film. So he also made Close Encounters and The Sting. And when I first started working for him was literally the week or 2 that his ex-wife wrote this book called You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again. And it was about their days she was the first woman to win an Oscar for as a producer. And it wasn't until like 30, 40 years later that any other woman won an Oscar for Best Producer. But it was like huge in town. Like everybody in town knew it. But I was like 19, 20 years old. And, to me, it seemed cool. But, to the rest of Hollywood, it was like scandal. And because it was like a kiss and tell almost with Spielberg and Scorsese and, all those names like that. So it was fun. And then I ended up becoming a guardian to his daughter. She and I bonded. She's now like 40, but she was like 8 or 9 then. And when she came to boarding school in London, when I moved to London to work in film sales. So we sold Hollywood films to various territories around the world: Germany, Spain, France, Japan, Russia, Latin America was usually one big block. And I would do that. And it was an amazing crash course in, economics and debt restructuring and currency exchange, because all of our deals were in dollars, but we had the Italian lira at that time. This is in the late 90s. All the time, there was an entire Italian desk because their currency would devalue all the time. So always, as we were the creditor, they owed us money. Always, they had all the power because they would say, well, we can't pay you we owe you in dollars because our currency's just been devalued by 30%. So you have to take 30% less. So that was, the creditors normally have no power. They have less power because you want whatever you can get, right? Since the financial crisis, the central banks have stepped in and forced creditors to be paid 100% of whatever they're owed. So that was different. My experience was with Capital Films, where I worked with the sales. It was wild. I mean, we went through the Russian ruble crisis. We had to renegotiate that. And the Pakistan had set off a nuclear bomb. They owed us $5,000. It wasn't much, but my job was I had to chase them for this. And they sent me a fax. But this is in the days of fax machines. And they sent me a fax saying, due to a nuclear explosion our country set off, we can't pay you. And I was like, because of the World Bank shut them off the financial grid. So it was like a learning. It was like into the fire of international trade. And it was a very good learning experience.
That sounds like quite a meandering journey to want to go into literature, philosophy, that kind of career path, and ending up, in essence, almost accounts for the biggest media cartels in the world. Did you ever, at some point along that journey, ever feel like, man, this is not where I'm meant to be?
You meet like the most interesting people. I had crazy life experience, and the journey was the fun part for me. You met movie stars, film stars, directors, and just crazy characters on the set and behind the scenes and distributors. And it was like being a character in the Canterbury Tales, like, freaks on this journey towards making a film. By the way, they would take 10 to 20 years to make. Like films I worked on the scripts like 20, 30 years ago are only just getting made. Like it takes forever to get made. So it's all about the journey in the film world. So when I started working in television after film, it was so much more exciting to me in a way, because, when I worked in film, there was, especially in the development side, when you're working on scripts, it was kind of like, it almost didn't feel real. Like you just went to breakfast meetings, then a lunch meeting, and then drinks. And then, you went to Hollywood film premieres, and, nothing ever really got made. You just, you met for lunch and you socialized. And I could never explain to my mom what I did. Like she was trying to explain to her friends what I do out there. And it's like, I just read scripts. And I was like 19 and meeting with Richard Dreyfuss on how to fix a script. And I remember him like looking at me going, how old are you anyway? I was like 19. And he's like, what are you going to tell me? I say, I don't know.
And Tell us about the moment that you met Max for the first time. I mean, you're meeting some of the biggest names in world fame, and a guy by the name of Max Keiser, who is a Wall Street banker, steals your heart. Tell us how that happened.
Well, we had actually just passed in Los Angeles because I left after the 92 riots and then 94 earthquake. And there was just like fires, earthquakes, floods there. And I was just like lockdowns. We had martial law, essentially. I lived in a street called South Dunsmuir where the Korean embassy was, the Korean consulate. And so during those Rodney King riots, like our road was occupied by tanks because they were protecting the Korean embassy or the Korean consulate. And, I was just tired of it. I was like, I just want a calm life outside of the chaos of Los Angeles. And I left and moved to London. Max moved to Los Angeles from Paris. So we just missed there. And then we almost just missed in the south of France. I met him in the south of France because I had been working on a comedy TV series for the BBC. And it was animation, and animation I will never do again. It takes a long time. It's hard work. And we were also working with French people. So they have a different sense of comedy than me as American, but mostly British writers on our team. But I literally, the day that it wrapped, I went down to the south of France because my friend lived there. And I met Max the first day. I went to the internet cafe because that was 2003. And he was there. He came in for a coffee, and his friend owned it. He knew the guy who owned it because it's a small town, Villefranche-sur-Mer. And I also knew the owner because he was friends with the guy I was staying with. Anyway, Max asked me if I wanted a drink. So I was like, okay, I'll have a drink. And he explained he was like 43 years old, and he said he was retired. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. Like, who's retired at 43? That's bullshit. And no, he had retired after selling a .com company. And then, we just connected immediately. And he was telling me his stories about working on Wall Street, right? And this is where it actually connects to Hollywood, because he, in Hollywood, one course I took at UCLA, basically they teach you to read Aristotle's Poetics. That's the foundation upon which all scripts are written in Hollywood. And, there's just three basic tenets, essentially, of a great drama: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself, right? So Aristotle, that's who you have to read to understand stories. So Max is telling me all these stories about being a banker. It's like, you're lying. Like, there's no way you could just do this and just commit these crimes. Like, why don't I know about this? Like, the bad guy doesn't win. The bad guy doesn't win. That's a Hollywood trope because of the reasons that Aristotle laid out. The bad guy's not supposed to win. Anyway, like, he starts giving me the Financial Times, and like, as a script person, as a Hollywood person, I'm like, oh my God, like, they're openly talking about this. Like, I was reading this like a thriller going, I can't believe this is in 2003. And I was just reading it, like, just dumbfounded and captivated that, I can't believe what you told me is true. Like, and they're writing about it right there in the paper. And he's like, yeah, did you think I was lying? I was like, yeah, like, I can't believe you could just do this. So Aristotle, of course, gives you the also the writes about money, and it's still to this day, like, what is money and what is good money, and he's also wrote that. So whatever it is that Aristotle knew, both story and money, and I guess Max often calls Bitcoin a messaging app. It's communication, right? And a story is communication. You're telling a story, and Aristotle called money the ultimate equalizer. So when you're talking about drama, it's often resolving injustices. A man or a woman meet an injustice and they have to overcome this injustice, and the situation is resolved as the good guy wins. And here we're talking similar stories.
Did you always have that penchant for injustice, or was it just the fascination with the story? The standard sort of story arc was, we want to see the good guy win, or was it an internal sort of compass that said, this is unjust, something needs to be done about it?
I don't think I was like super aware of the injustice first. I came to through stories first, and this is a good. I was always a huge reader. Like I read obsessively as a child. Even like my kindergarten report card that we get in America. My teacher said, "Stacy's a really good student, but she reads too much." Like I would sit in the little library, that little tiny children's library, and just read books after obsessively. But what Max was telling me and what I was reading in the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal was a blatantly the bad guy wins, and he was winning every day, and she was winning every day. And that system, and once you see that, and once you understand the story that is happening in front of our eyes about this global injustice, the uprisings right now in America, fundamentally, it's a story of not only racist injustice, but the injustice of the monetary system in particular. That the Cantillon effect is something that we talk about all the time on Keiser Report. And the Cantillon effect is the ultimate injustice. What it is doing is the money is created and goes to the elite, those in the banking system close to the Fed. The Fed gives them money at 0%. And by the time it comes from the top of the source of the money to the bottom, like think of a river flowing from the Himalayas down into, I don't know, Bombay or something, and it's like toxic and dirty and filled with chemicals and all sorts of stuff by the time it reaches the city. That's kind of like our monetary system. And yet they pretend it's all benign and just like neutral, and we're independent Fed, and we're not involved in like punishing anybody, but it is punishing people because it is unjust. And they do create a moral hazard with the constant bailout of the banks and the constant refusal to stop all the crimes, like what we saw in 2008.
Stacy, what is your favorite story to date? You've done so many different stories, so much work on a number of different channels. Obviously, Keiser Report has just blown up in the last 10 years. But out of everything you've done, is there one particular story that you can pick that would be a favorite?
Well, I think covering the Greek financial crisis had the most profound impact. When Max and I went there, we were like, everybody knew us. Everybody, like thousands of people out in St. Thomas Square protesting the troika, the bailout, the bailout of the creditors, and the basically starvation of the people. It was a profound injustice what happened to the people of Greece. It had all the elements of, you had Goldman Sachs and the fraud that was perpetrated in order to get into the European Monetary Union. They helped hide the Greek debt behind credit default swaps. So they lied to get in, and Goldman Sachs uniquely understood that they actually had all this debt off the balance sheet that nobody else knew, and then got into this situation where, as part of the European Union, their interest rates were far too low, which caused the debt explosion, and it also caused inflation because, once they became part of the Eurozone, the prices there went up significantly. Like with the drachma, they would have, like, if it costs like the equivalent of €1 for a cup of coffee, then it suddenly went to like €4, equal with whatever Paris was charging. And then you have the intervention of these, bodies like the IMF and the ECB, like ganging up on the people. That was, for me, the most profound, in terms of my understanding of the financial world and the elite versus the people. Wherever you are, the elite will always go against the people. And that's what I learned from that story. And Cyprus soon after that, and Ireland were also, like, when the elite bodies of unelected officials intervene on behalf of creditors and make the people pay, and the people didn't really even get to enjoy the benefit of all the crime that happened.
Those elites and those banking cartels have been the subject of a lot of conspiracy theories over decades, almost centuries, really. What are your opinions, having researched, having reported on the banking systems for so long? What is your opinion on those conspiracies that believe that really the world is simply controlled by a handful of cartels that are pulling strings? Is that really the case in your opinion, or is it just a case of an extremely complex system that is so difficult to pin down?
I think it's probably the latter. I think it's probably just a very complex system and the hubris of man who always thinks they can control everything. And I think perhaps the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell probably thinks he's doing good. He probably thinks he means well, and he's doing all that he can to help the ordinary American. But he kind of even said it recently, where he insists that the Fed is not causing inequality, which probably means he knows it's causing. He's thinking about this, and he's causing this unrest. I mean, I think the top 1% globally probably are more similar to each other than than they to their own domestic 99%, the lower 99%. I think there is an elite class which have class interest, especially in a globalized world where capital reigns. There are those conspiracy theories, the Jewish cabal of bankers running the world. I mean, interestingly, I studied oral literature as well at UCLA from a very famous specialist in oral literature. He was a Finnish professor and was specialized in the Kalevala, which is the Finnish national epic, and which had been orally transmitted for like 100 years or 200 years, and then was finally written down in like the early 1900s. But one of the things that, children's tales are the oldest, of naive, like these little naive children they still sing songs like Ring Around the Rosies, Pocket Full of Posies, which is hundreds of years old. These Grimm's fairy tales, all these fables are ancient, and they're still told to children, whereas like literature for adults is like huge and a wide variety of them. So I think I understand where the origin of those conspiracies come from is from the Middle Ages, of course, when that notion erupted because when the Black Plague came during the Dark Ages, and people didn't understand where this plague was coming from and why 30% or 50% of the population was dropping dead from this horrific disease, and they thought it was from all the money they owed and the debts they owed, and who did they owe debts to? Because of course the Christian bankers at that time were not allowed to charge any interest, so they didn't have bankers that were Christian that they owed all this money to. So I think it's this weird, naive, sort of like childish thing still left over from hundreds of years ago, where there's like clearly no evidence of that today. It's just a banking class, an elite class, a corporate class. Like Jack Ma, for example, is not a banker, but he has financial services now with Alipay, I guess. But he's just as connected to. He's more similar to Jay Powell than like ordinary people are, ordinary American are. There's a class interest, and they act together with these trade deals. It just is just a part of the process of it. Just might have come about by accident. I don't think they all sit around and conspire against this. I think that a lot of them probably, as you could see with whether it's Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or maybe Jeff Bezos doesn't even try to pretend to really care too much about anybody, but they try to say, look, I'm a good person, I'm giving away my money, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And, but they don't do anything to stop the system that favors them, that whether it's this monetary system and the Cantillon effect, or the trade deals for for Bill Gates, and the trade deals that have onerous copyright and patent laws that benefit him and make him a multi-billionaire. He doesn't do anything to stop that, which would benefit other nations, other peoples, the bottom 99%, but he feels bad and he'll give the money away.
So I'd like to talk about your American situation and where you guys are now. I mean, it's an incredibly remarkable scene unfolding at the moment as the left and the right seems to be polarizing so extremely at the moment. You and Max moved back when Trump got elected. You've now been in the based in the States for almost half a decade now after being in London for so long. What is your read on the situation at the moment in the States? How different is it from when you left in the 90s?
Well, we returned in the summer of 2016 to because Max's mother was unwell. She was old, and we moved here. And the thing that I was struck by is, first, at that time, like, we had just come from London, and I assumed for sure that CNN, which is what we could get in London, and the New York Times and stuff like that were right. Like, that, it seemed like there's no way Trump is going to win, like all that crazy stuff he was saying. And it just seemed like, sure, he's going to lose. Hillary's going to win in a landslide. And so we came to North Carolina, which is a swing state, one of the only, there's a few swing states, and they're the only ones that matter in the elections. And it's a purple state. So it's an almost equal blend of red and blue. And so Hillary was going to win this state by 5 points. And, we were taking care of his mom and driving around, picking up supplies. And I noticed after 3 or 4 weeks, I was like, I don't ever see something that happens in America during elections is yard signs and bumper stickers, right? I notice I don't see any Hillary yard signs or bumper stickers. And we're in the most blue, Democratic area of the state. So I was like, that's kind of bizarre. And then, so we would just go out driving and looking, and sure enough, you would see not many, but you would see Trump signs and Trump bumper stickers, but no Hillary. You would see a lot of Bernie, like everywhere. Bernie, 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 Bernie. And some Obama from 2008 and 2012. So I just made a comment on our show. It's like, I still believe that New York Times must know something, but just so you know, you don't see any sign of support at all for Hillary. And sure enough, she lost by 5 points, not won by 5 points here. So that, obviously they got something so wrong, where I could visually see with my own eyes around me that she wasn't going to win here. I mean, they were so convincing in their headlines that I thought I must be seeing just the wrong evidence, right? Like, the stuff I see in front of my eyes must be wrong. But I was right. My instinct was right that there was something wrong about this picture. The other thing I learned is that, because we've done 2 documentary series, Great American Pilgrimage and Gonzo, where we traveled across the US. And I swear to God, all the crazy is on Twitter. It's not out there in the real world. People are normal. You walk around and, people are just normal freaks, right? You have the people of Walmart and that sort of stuff, and crazy dressed people and all sorts of characters that you have in America, but they're not hysterical. Online is hysteric. Everybody there has lost their mind, and they're so emotional. It was so quiet, just and calm, driving, not being able to get on Twitter because we're driving all the time for days on end, and everything was just peaceful and normal, and not all this outrage and deplatforming and cancel this person and cancel that. It's just so it's not. I don't think it's as bad in the real world as as what it is on Twitter. I think on Twitter it's a little bit insane.
I think that's a really important observation for people like us here who aren't based in the USA, aren't seeing that on the ground.
I thought the same thing. And it's surprising how ordinary it is offline, outside of social media, that people just live their lives. But the problem is, a lot of policy is now being set based on the hysterics online. And that's just a small percentage of the population. And that could be dangerous because I don't think the ordinary person feels the same way. I mean, there's a huge, America's unique, and it's that it's very kind of libertarian, especially the whole vast West and the Midwest and stuff is they don't like the state and they don't want people bothering them and telling them what to do. And that's how we were founded. So that's different from Europe. Europeans like the state to be involved in certain things, and most Americans don't. So, the fact that policy is now being guided by the most hysterical people online who are really just projecting. I believe in this notion of projection. Somebody who's always saying something, they talk about if your abusive father is telling you, you're stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid, and they say the same thing all the time, it's usually because they feel stupid, they feel insecure, and they're projecting onto you what they feel. So I think, a lot of these hysterical people online who are like, do something, do something, do something, do something. It's they need to do that about themselves. They need to sort themselves out and know themselves and understand, come to, find a peace with themselves instead of just trying to ruin everybody else's life.
All right, Stacey, just before we go any further, we are going to take a short break, only a couple of seconds to hear from our sponsors, Luno.
Ready to start your crypto journey? You can instantly buy and sell Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies on Luno. No experience needed. As simple as shopping online. Sign up today with the safe and easy way to buy, store, and learn about cryptocurrency. Go to www.luno.com or download the Luno app. T's and C's apply. Cryptocurrencies are volatile and unpredictable. Never risk more than you're willing to lose.
Okay, and we're back. Now, Stacey, let's move to crypto itself and to the beautiful thing that is sovereign money in digital form, Bitcoin. You obviously are one of the leading voices in proposing Bitcoin. I mean, for me personally, I learned my initial years was from what you had said on the Keiser report way back in 2013. For someone who is so early on in the game, take us back to that penny drop moment when you first read about and understood Bitcoin.
I mean, the real penny drop didn't happen until 2017 when the great fork wars happened and Bitcoin split to Bitcoin Cash and then Bitcoin SV. And then I understood all that went before it. Because at those early days, it was still so experimental. There was nowhere to read any information in 2011, nowhere except these crazy forum boards that Bitcoin Talk, that they were, it was mostly hackers and coders. And you didn't, it was the language was so difficult to access. You didn't know what they were talking about. We came to it because, again, we were looking at the crimes being committed, these conspiracy theories of what the bankers were doing. And you could either complain about it, you could go write letters to the Federal Reserve Bank, you could write letters to the Treasury and agitate to the politicians to do something, or you could exit that system. You could opt out and get gold. So we were talking about gold and as a way to exit that financial system. And then John Matonis, we were in Paris at the time, emailed me at the end of 2010 and said, I'm going to be in Paris in a few weeks. Can I come on and talk about Bitcoin? And I was like, what's Bitcoin? And I thought it was a digital currency, and Max had created the Hollywood Stock Exchange. So I thought it was I said, Max, this guy, John Matonis, is coming in and he's going to talk to you about Bitcoin, which is the Hollywood dollar. So I thought it was this, internet money, or magic internet money. And I didn't consider it as the equal of gold at that time. I'm a gold girl, and that was gold and silver, and that was my thing. And he came into the studio, did the interview. You could see in the interview, Max going wait, this isn't the Hollywood dollar. What is this? And then when it aired, the audience went ballistic. In the comments, they were they called it a shit coin. And they were like, this is such a scam. Somebody created this coin and it's worth $50 million. This is in the comments. And he's just running off with $50 million. This is a scam, because there were 21 million coins, like $2.25. It was at the price at the time. But it was the reaction to it, like the visceral, like emotional reaction that made me go like, what? Like, what is this? Like, why, why are people so angry about it? And it was a lot of the gold bugs were really angry about it. And so, it's still like there wasn't much written out there. It was hard to find any information about it. But then Amir Taki saw that interview, and he was one of the early Bitcoin core devs and came up with the first BIP, the Bitcoin Improvement Protocol #1. And he reached out to us and said, can I come on and talk about Bitcoin? And I was like, yeah, like, I want to know more about why everybody hates this. And so, it was kind of like a learning process. And I was playing off the audience a lot. Like the fact that they were so angry made me want to understand what that power was. It was a huge power. In Hollywood, you want the audience to have a reaction, right? You want like that sort of reaction, because you've told a story really well. If they're either really angry or really happy or really excited, like Rocky standing up and like cheering, and you want them to have a visceral reaction like that. So we kept on going about that, and at that time, it was definitely like still, like that Cambrian sort of explosion, like in the early days of us, all creatures coming up with 2 eyes. Remember, there were some creatures that had 3 eyes, 4 eyes, 5 eyes. They were trying, like, the process was trying to come up with, evolution understood eyes were a good idea, but like how many eyes is really like the best? And we've been going through that all those early days of crypto, of Bitcoin, when people were like, well, we want many transactions. We want like, all sorts of things, smart contracts, all these sort of things were just like part of that sloppy evolution that at the end of the day, Bitcoin ended up being like the creature that had the 2 eyes, the spine down the middle, basically matching size. Like it was the one that was evolutionary perfect. That was it. And a lot of people just think they don't understand the 30 years before Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin didn't just erupt out of nothingness. It was like over 20 years of cypherpunk ideas and they were seeking this. There were many iterations of trying to come up with something like this, and then it came, and then it was Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was born. It was like the beginning of the Old Testament.
So what we do is we ask our guests to ask the next guest a question. And so following on from the question about Bitcoin, our previous guest was Arthur Hayes of BitMEX. And he asked you, Stacy, he asked this. What would you ask Stacy?
I would want to know what she thinks is the most exciting non-Bitcoin project for 2020 that she has seen.
That is easy. That is money printer go brrr. That project we are at a historical moment. This is like, this is like being in 1785 Paris or 1915 Russia. You're about there, like you have these elite that, again, they might be well-meaning. They might think they're trying to save the system. And, they're saying, here, have this brioche, we're printing money to save everything. But I think they don't understand what's coming. And I think there's going to be something as radical as what happened in, 1789 or what happened in 1917. I think it's going to be a total break, and it's going to happen overnight, but really it's been happening for the last 20 years. All the foundation for it is there right in front of your eyes. They can't see it. Maybe they do somewhere inside. I think that's why Jay Powell says stuff like, really, we're not fostering inequality. It's nothing to do with us. I think he knows, and he's scared, and he doesn't know how to stop it, because at this point, you can't. Like, you have to keep putting your fingers in the new holes, like blowing out the dam, like, because the dam's going to fall on you. So like, what are you going to do at this point? You got to keep on plugging the holes, right? So I think that's the most important project to me, to watch this and see. They keep on, they keep blowing my mind with what they're doing. And like negative interest rates, for example, when we had that first, like a year and a half ago, like nowhere in 5,000 years of economic history does that even exist, because you're saying time has no value. Like, that's revolutionary, mind-blowing stuff that we've just done. Like, it breaks the laws of physics. And then we've just had 8 weeks ago, negative oil prices. Again, like, this is caused by this project, as Arthur had asked, like this project of trying to contain this fiat money system that we've had since 1971, and all the debt pile that's just massively built behind this huge dam that they're trying to keep from falling onto the global economy and crushing us all, especially themselves. But so we had negative interest rates first. Time has no value. Then matter has no value. So energy is the most important thing to life, is energy. So here you suddenly have energy has no value. Energy has no value. Time has no value. What the heck? What happens next? Like, it's going to be, it breaks the laws of nature. So something will happen to restore the laws.
I know we're way out of time, but what do you think that looks like? You talk about a sort of overnight moment. Do you have any kind of idea as to what that could look like?
That's like hyperinflation sort of thing. Hyperinflation is also sudden. Like, there's deflation and inflation, and like deflation is money prices coming down, and that might be a good thing because industry is getting more efficient, and the prices of your sneakers or your sweater is going down. I'm using the Americanisms. I know you might not use that there. Your jumper, and then inflation, is a monetary thing. It's a monetary process. Is the Fed's printing money, and they're printing more money, and beyond the goods and services being produced to compensate for that, blah blah blah. And that's gradual, and it might go up and down and fluctuate. Hyperinflation is a political event. It's a sudden change of mindset. You see that very clearly, and again, people can't really see this because of their political ideology and their partisanship and hatred. But when we had in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, if you look for 100 years in Venezuela, it's a developing economy, and they always have high inflation. So there was high inflation under Hugo Chavez as well. Between 8 and 12, 13%. Then look at their hyperinflation. When does it start? Like, exactly when Hugo Chavez dies. So that is a political moment where people have no faith in the new government coming in, taking over, that they have any authority, that they have any power, that they are going to be able to maintain the value of their currency. And you saw that instantly as soon as, Maduro obviously is not a very, he's not a leader. He's obviously not a leader, and he's maybe lacks the power to either control all the elements of the economy or be in charge, or, fighting off all sorts of interventions and stuff. Who knows? But whatever it is, the population no longer they didn't have faith in him, and you could see that reflected in the currency. So that could be what you see. Is it will be, everybody says the dollar will always be the reserve currency, because who's going to replace it? China doesn't want to replace it, because in order to have the reserve currency, you have to have a trade deficit. And they don't want a trade deficit because they have 1.4 billion people, and 1.4 billion people without a job, that's unrest, right? Here in America, we've decided we don't, people don't have jobs, and they take opioids instead and overdose and get food stamps, and maybe that's fine. But you're starting to see unrest. People are starting to understand that they'd rather have jobs. They'd rather manufacture and produce things. And like, get rid of this reserve currency. They don't know that. They're not articulating it that yet, but that's the underlying reason for their unrest. But there's an absolute faith still that the dollar is going to be the reserve currency for the next 30, 40 years, just like nobody in the Palace of Versailles ever thought like their divine rights of kings, right? Like God appointed me. I'm king because of God. Like nobody's going to like storm the palace gates, right? This doesn't happen because they're not appointed by God, and I'm God's representative, and they're not going to, I'm the Sun King, and like, this can't happen. The same thing with Tsar Nicholas. He couldn't enter his mind that this would despite all the uprisings and violence and protests and riots and out in front of his palace, like it never crossed his mind that they would like behead him and basically kill him. So I think it's the same sort of thing. Right now, a lot of people think things can't happen. And as soon as everybody agrees that it can't happen, it probably will. But it won't be for them not trying. The elite, the system benefits them. But when hundreds of millions or billions of people decide this doesn't work for us, it's going to, I don't know what happens in the aftermath. Look at, the French Revolution versus the Russian Revolution, very different outcomes. It was bloody on both sides, and reigns of terror and horrible stuff happened. But it can be peaceful as well, like Bitcoin, gold. I think, we're in an interesting time. We have this empire declining in power, and that's always throughout history. Famously the most violent of and difficult of times, the Thucydides trap, as they call it. So you have that generational shift, you have that fourth turning, which I think I always thought it was kind of wacky, but then like you read it again and you start to really understand like it does make sense, these generational shifts. And so we have that in America, and I think that also explains some of the weird partisanship. I think it's the boomers versus the millennial and Z, who they're right now exactly equal voting power. They have the same number of votes. But the boomers have always had the votes they want for whatever they want, they get, right? Just because of the votes. And now the boomers, they have all this benefit of fiat. They were 20 in 1971 when we went off the gold standard. So they've been like never ending increase in asset prices, their home prices, their stock portfolio, everything keeps on going up. And now the young generation was like, well, we can't afford a house. We can't afford healthcare. We can't afford education. We can't afford, we want redistribution. We want this back. And I think this is part of the complex political situation that's happening here. So I think we live in interesting times.
Yeah, absolutely. Who would you recommend people read in these times? Are there any authors or current day sort of essayists that you really feel are shedding light on the situation?
Well, I think you go back to the classics, like all the Enlightenment thinkers, the French Enlightenment, all the Scottish Enlightenment. Just go Google it and look it up and read some of their writing. I think the transcendentalists in America, like Ralph Waldo Emerson or Henry David Thoreau or Walt Whitman, and like this notion of self-reliance is important to read right now. I think the cypherpunks and the Cypherpunk Manifesto is a good read. And I think the message in 1929, September 1929, when the financial crash happened, at that same time was published A Room of One's Own. And Virginia Woolf in that book argued essentially that financial independence for a woman is necessary in order to achieve intellectual freedom. So I think Bitcoin is that. Like, it's important to have a Satoshi of one's own, because it's not the price, it's not all that stuff. It's hard to understand until you own a couple of Satoshis. It's $1 worth, $2 worth. You don't have to be wealthy. You just have to own a few Satoshis of your own, and your mind starts to change, your time preference, your understanding of the economy, your understanding of the monetary system, your understanding of yourself as an individual, and your own power, that it's not divine, like it's not handed down from the central banks. Your wealth is not handed down it's not printed up and created for you, that there is this whole universe out there as soon as you get a few Satoshis. And it's a big learning curve, and it's not, you have to learn how to secure your Bitcoin. You have to learn how to do all this stuff. But once you're a part of the Bitcoin world, like it's like we're all the same, we're all, whether you're from Argentina or South Africa or Cambodia, like we're all like Bitcoiners.
Well, there we go. We're not going to keep you much longer, Stacey. This has been absolutely incredible. We so appreciate your time and your insights. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
And there it is, episode 8, done and dusted. What a chat with Stacy Herbert of the Keiser Report. How about that story of John Matonis? Really one of the first times that most of the world would have heard about Bitcoin on the Keiser Report way back in 2011. I can tell you that it was May 2011. That's going way back. I mean, I heard about Bitcoin for the first time on the Keiser Report in 2013. So they were first talking about it back in 2011. Remarkable story. That's what these interviews are all about, getting to those finer details of this remarkable story that is Bitcoin, that is decentralized sovereign money. So next episode's going to be a cracker. As always, we have Tone Vase in the house, so be sure to tune in. If you're on YouTube and watching this live, thank you for participating in our live chat. Special thanks to our sponsors, Luno. Check them out if you don't have an account with them already. Luno.com, ranked in the top 10 crypto exchanges by Crypto Compare. Luno.com. I'm James Preston. Until the next episode of the Global Crypto Podcast, it's goodbye for now.
And it's gone.